It's recording now, it's ready.
You can start.
Welcome everybody to this extremely exciting 90 minutes where we're going to be exploring the relationship between the current COVID-19 pandemic and food systems and how we can build back better. Next slide, please. My name is Brent Loken, the Global Food Lead Scientist. We have a jam-packed agenda, a lot of exciting speakers. And we hope that by the end of this, you'll be able to take something away, each one of you, so that within your particular context, we can all work to build back better. Next slide, please. Now, some tips for this webinar to make it go a bit more smoothly is that please keep your please keep everything on mute so that we can avoid any sort of feedback. Please submit your questions within the chat box, and if your question is for one particular individual, please identify who that person is for. That will help our team and being able to direct to the right person. We will have a couple points where we will be able to stop and ask questions, and this is being actually recorded right now. Next slide, please. So the agenda, after my welcome, we will move right into the exciting keynote speech by Dr. David Nabarro. We will then talk about some research findings about how the food environment has changed with the recent COVID-19 pandemic. Then a couple practical cases where we'll explore what's happening in two different countries, Costa Rica and also Brazil. And then comments from an exciting panel of experts. Next slide, please. So why this webinar? The Sustainable Food Systems Program is part of the UN One Planet Network. And this is part of a webinar series. And the SFS program works with individual countries to help countries make the shift towards more sustainable and healthy diets. This is all leading up to the third global conference, which will be held this year, and we'll be sending out some more information about that in the weeks to come. Next slide, please. Each one of you, when you did register, you got a couple of questions, and we will be addressing these questions throughout. Our panel of experts will give their opinion upon what they think of these questions, and towards the end of the webinar, we will also highlight some of the main ideas that each one of you said as you answer these questions as well and sent in your answers to us. So these will be the main questions that will guide this webinar, and hopefully at the end we will have answered them to some degree. Next slide, please. So I think we're all, I mean, I don't think this pandemic, you know, it's touched each one of us in a very different way. And there's very few people on this planet that haven't been affected in some way by this. Next slide. And as we're thinking about building back better, and that's what the theme of this webinar is how do we make sure that the food systems moving forward are better than what they were before? We also have to look backwards, and we also have to think about, well, what were the underlying drivers that gave rise to this? And it's by understanding those underlying drivers that will help us prevent or decrease the risk of something like this happening again. Now in April, the science team at WWF spent about 4 very intensive weeks identifying and looking into what these drivers were. And we published this report a few weeks ago, which investigated some of these drivers, and I'll share with you some brief findings from that now. Next slide, please. What we've seen over the past 30 or 40 years is a rapid rise of these emerging infectious diseases, you know, things like Zika, avian flu, HIV, Nipah, Hendra, swine flu, SARS, Ebola, MERS, and now COVID-19. And we've seen this rapidly increasing curve of these diseases that are coming from animals. And we wanted to learn is what were some of the drivers that gave rise to this? Why have we seen such a large increase over the past 20 or 30 years? Next slide, please. And there's many ways that a disease can come from an animal. And there are 7 different pathways that we looked at. They can come directly from an animal, use an intermediate vector, and then they can come into humans. If you look at pathway number 1 and 2, these are things like Lyme disease, malaria, dengue fever. Number 3, that pathway is directly from an animal like a rat to a human. And the thing which is different about these pathways is that it doesn't involve direct human-to-human transmission. What we mainly focused our research on were pathways 4, 6, and 7. It's those diseases that jump directly from animals, use an intermediate host, which is mainly and most often a wild animal or also domestic animal, and that jumps over to humans, and that once it's within the human population, it's spread among humans. And it's those diseases that have the most impact on the planet, and they can give rise to pandemics. Next slide, please. So the drivers that we found that were some of the most common and most important drivers of this rapid rise of these EIDs that we've seen. The first one is how we're using animals, how we're using wild animals. You know, we're producing them, we're selling them, we're consuming them in ways that we've never done over the past 20 or 30 years. This rapid rise in how we're using these wild animals. And what we're doing them also is we're putting them into these markets, putting them alongside domestic animals, creating the perfect conditions where a virus can jump from one animal to the next and spill over into humans. The second driver is how we're producing food. We're intensifying agriculture production. We're intensifying the way they're producing animals. We're producing and putting a lot more animals in a very small area. And that also gives rise to these perfect conditions where a virus could jump from one animal to the next and possibly over into humans. The third one is land use change and what is happening with land. You know, we're encroaching on forests, we're cutting down forests. And it's this encroachment onto these wild areas that is putting humans, domestic animals, and wildlife into the same area, once again creating the perfect conditions for a spillover event to us. Next slide, please. Now, the main driver which is driving these other ones is this global demand, this increasing demand that we have for animal protein and wildlife products. And all of these drivers that we've seen are following a similar type increasing curve, at the same as we've seen with this rapid rise of EIDs over the past 20 or 30 years. And if we don't solve this global demand for protein and animal protein and also wildlife products, it's going to be very hard to solve the other ones, because this main driver amplifies the other drivers as well. Now, the good thing about this is all of these drivers also give rise to other crises, such as if we're looking at the climate crisis, or if we're talking about the biodiversity crisis. So the great thing about it is that if we solve one of them, we have a true opportunity for a win-win-win solutions. Next slide, please. However, and what we're going to explore within this webinar are those leverage points. So as we're looking at building back better, and how do we build back a food system which is better than what it was before? We know that the food system, what we eat, how we produce food, has given rise to this. So how do we prevent and decrease the risk from that happening, so this doesn't happen again? And we need to look at these leverage points. And as we're looking at what are the key things that we can do in the system to create change, it's extremely important that we identify and then that we implement leverage points that will have the most impact. And as we implement these leverage points, next slide, please, we have to ensure that we don't make the vulnerable more vulnerable. And that's one of the things that it's extremely careful. So as we explore what to do in individual countries, in individual places, that this is one of the things that always has to be at the forefront of every single decision that we make. And on that note, as we're thinking about building back better, I can think of no better person to speak on this subject than our next speaker. Next slide, please. Dr. David Nabarro. He's a true food champion, a food hero. He's been working tirelessly over the past 20 or 30 years globally to make the world a better place. And it's an honor to be here, and it's an honor, David, to have this time. You've got an extremely busy schedule. And for everybody else out there, if you do have questions for David, we've got about 5 minutes after David speaks to be able to ask him some of these questions. And on that, David, it's an honor to hand it over to you and to hear your insights.
Thank you very much indeed, Brent, and good day, everybody. I'm going to shorten my presentation to have more time for comments and questions. So it's now, I'm just checking my watch. Thank you. Just COVID, as Brent said, is touching everybody. But it's amazing because this virus, which is brand new, only announced itself to the world really about 6 months ago. And everybody, all 7.8 billion people in our world, are coming to terms with it and trying to understand what it means. But perhaps I can offer a few just headlines of what I've come to understand about the virus, about its impact on food systems in particular, and how I believe it's encouraging us to move forward in a different way. So, it is here to stay, this virus. It's not going to suddenly disappear. So, it's probably a good idea to not talk about post-COVID, but instead to talk about living with COVID or being COVID ready. And there certainly is a chance that a vaccine will be developed and will be made available to everybody, but that's a pretty massive project. It's massive in terms of science, massive in terms of investment, massive in terms of logistics, massive in terms of diplomacy, and most of all, massive in terms of requiring trust. And in a world where there's a growing hesitancy about immunization, we need to be a bit careful about imagining that somehow we're all going to be vaccinated in the near future. Probably 2.5 years or longer. So we have to live with the constant threats posed by this virus, which is making its way quite slowly across the world, infecting people in different communities. And we've got to come to terms with what living with the threat of this virus is going to mean. Just say a bit about the virus. I mean, you all know that it causes respiratory illness that tends to really affect older people and people with concomitant illness. But the more we watch this virus, the more we learn that it has a whole series of impacts that we didn't know about. And so what we're saying to everybody is don't take it lightly. It does seem as though this virus in different populations can have a range of impacts. Take it seriously, be careful about it. And it's not sensible to think in terms of just everybody being infected by this virus and somehow developing a sort of immunity over time. That would be incredibly wasteful in terms of lost lives and suffering, damage to health services and the rest. And so the only way to get on top of this virus is to basically defend ourselves against it at the community level by identifying people with the disease and making sure they're isolated quickly, and by finding their contacts and isolating them and protecting the people who are vulnerable. And it has to be something that all people everywhere build into their normal ways of living, which means maintaining physical distance where possible, protecting our faces, and also being ready to deal with outbreaks as they come along. Is it impossible? Well, I don't think so. I'm seeing how countries in East Asia, which had really been very effective in dealing with something called SARS in 2003, are getting on top of this and are finding that they can live with it. Countries in Europe are starting to do so. It's not always the most powerful countries that are moving most quickly. In fact, what's fascinating to me is that many of the poorer countries that in general, in global terms, seem to be weaker, but that have got strong community level organization, are being very effective at being able to deal with the virus. Vietnam, for example, showing incredible resilience. And then others that are perhaps more likely to be able to do well, but still having challenges like Singapore and South Korea. And of course, China, which has been really a very interesting country after some initial hesitancy, really did convey a strong response. But what are we learning as this COVID becomes more widespread? It exposes inequities everywhere. People whose jobs require them to work under really unsatisfactory conditions, people who live in crowded settlements or slums, they seem to be the ones most likely to get the disease. They seem to be the ones who are least able to defend themselves. So dealing with COVID requires us to face up to and react to inequities. And the containment strategies also reveal inequities. And perhaps just as I finish, the one area where we're really seeing a big impact is on our relationships with food. Because we do have to, in containing the virus, restrict movements in some places, what we're seeing is that there are huge independencies in people's livelihoods, huge inequities with regard to food security and nutrition, and widespread dependency on food supply chains. And so as we go through and look at the problems, we see fragile food systems characterized by injustice, increasing insecurity in relation to food, increasing risk of malnutrition, and greater suffering among farmers. And what we're also seeing is that solidarity initiatives are on the rise, direct buying from farmers, and then redirecting food to the people who are vulnerable that would otherwise have been wasted. So as the societies in our world come to terms with COVID and move forward, let's also recognize that we are seeing the inequities glaring us in the face. Example, in some American states, Black people having a 5 or 6 times greater mortality than white people. No wonder we see frustration among many Black people, not just there, but in other parts of Europe, at the difficulties they face. So let's recognize the injustice, recognize the anger that this causes, and then work through that and take advantage of what we're learning to build food systems, nutrition systems, employment systems, and living systems that are fairer. Last point, Costa Rica, brilliant country, really advanced its whole economy based on nature and based on sustainability. Took incredible early steps to get on top of COVID, but now faced with enormous numbers of people unemployed because of the collapse of the tourism industry or the loss of markets for much of its produce. Terribly unfair, awful inequity. We have to make sure that the countries that have been doing brilliant work in sustainable development are not now hit as a result of the problems associated with COVID, and incorporate this into our collective planning and action. Thank you very much.
David, thank you very much. As always, extremely wise words. Got an initial question for you. You know, we talk about the biodiversity crisis, we talk about the climate crisis, we talk about the COVID-19 crisis. We've also got this growing global inequality crisis. And as you pointed out, it's the vulnerable that are most impacted by all of these. Now, do you have any specific examples? And in your view, what are some of the bold actions that we can take as a global community to build back better to address this crisis? Because if we don't solve the global inequality crisis, we won't be able to solve the others as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Number one, I'm very nervous of this term, build back better. We're not going backwards, we're moving forwards. Secondly, we have to recognize that it's not just simply a linear process. We have to leap forward better and with resolve. We have to do it with justice and fairness. And I'm really, really keen that we all recognize that it requires a new mindset. Yes, COVID reveals a whole series of inequities, but they can only be tackled by collective action, by the whole human family working together. And that collective action will be key to addressing inequality, biodiversity, and climate. However, we may not find that existing institutional structures or existing existing power dynamics will permit the emergence of the kind of leadership that is necessary for leaping forward better. And I would like to encourage everybody to use whatever instruments they have to encourage the emergence of collaborative, collective leadership that can be practiced anywhere in society, and not to wait for the current generation of national leaders to provide the context within which this new way of working will emerge. Right now, institutions like the G20, the G7, the UN General Assembly, the governing bodies of specialized agencies are still locked in constant debates and disagreements. And yet COVID is such an important and dramatic issue, revealing inequities, revealing the need to work together. I would like to encourage everybody to work in their own environments to see the emergence and coalescence of the kind of sustainable leadership, living systems leadership that is needed for the future. Don't rely on existing institutional processes. Let's let the new leaders, be they women, be they indigenous people, be they leaders of local communities, often very deprived communities, who lead by example and collective action. Let's let them find the structures that are going to be needed for the future.
Thank you, David. A couple questions. One is, can we do this with the same institutions that we have and the same dynamics? You hinted that we probably can. Space for more participatory decision making that involves more collaborative effort.
Thank you, Brent. Yeah, you were right. I'd rather anticipated that question. Of course, I'm somebody who believes that wherever possible, we should work with the existing institutions. Those of you who know me will be aware that for 45 years, I've been utterly committed to multilateral action. And I've seen some amazing progress. But at the same time, I've learned over the years that it is people who make a difference, and people everywhere, not just people in the boss positions. And with the current fractures in the multilateral process, we need collective action by people, collaborative action by groups of people, and systems thinking and leadership everywhere to really make the changes happen. What I'm really excited about is just the volume and intensity of this new style of working and leadership that I'm seeing emerging everywhere. And I'm not nervous about whether there's going to be enough of it, nor do I feel it needs to be channeled. What's important is now to let that energy emerge and to watch the new frameworks evolve in a way that will then lead us through, and to have the confidence in the power of the human spirit to make that happen.
And make sure that all these new changes that we're seeing actually stick, right? That they become sticky solutions and
yeah, but I mean, you see, we have to be ambitious, because without ambition, we get nowhere. We have to be audacious, because this way of working requires bravery, working outside our comfort zones. We have to be authentic, because you can only do this work if you connect with all parts of yourself, with your emotional core, with your spiritual core, and with your rational core, all working together. Because this is value-driven, it is emotion-linked, as well as the thinking part. And fourthly, and most importantly, it's about being accountable. Stuff sticks if people are accountable and are called to account. Stuff flips out the way and becomes elusive if there is no accountability. And I agree with you, accountability really matters, particularly for people like me who are working in health. We're always called to account for our failures. And obviously there is a failure here. We've got a virus that is causing all this trouble. We need to be called to account for that. But at the same time, it is quite extraordinary to see that there is goodness arriving and potentially being very good, even amidst the horrors and the misery associated with this virus and containment efforts.
Another question, David, about small farm operations. There's a lot of discussion about these long supply chains and how can we shorten them. Is a way that we can, moving forward as we think about building back better, what is the role of the small farmer, and how do we ensure that the small farmers are supported moving forward?
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, we're learning, aren't we, how long and convoluted supply chains are a vulnerability. And there is such sense in trying to make sure that small, localized supply chains work. Yes, they're a bit inconvenient, because you can't always get everything you want all the time. You have to cope with seasons. You have to cope with occasional breakdowns because of weather or because of conflict or because of some other factor that you didn't anticipate. But at the same time, unless we can get better at being local, we're not going to be resilient. We're not going to be empowering those people who produce at local level. Even here in my hometown, there is now a resurgent debate about whether there's got to be more and more giant shopping malls attracting in people from all over, or whether we really invest in the strength and the capacity of the local retailers and the local suppliers. And we're seeing it all over the world now, that why not work on the local, short-circuited, farmer-responsive, vulnerability-supporting supply systems? Why on earth have we allowed ourselves to live in a world with these fragile, very long supply systems? In the end, whose interests do they serve? Of course, we've got to have fallback mechanisms. If there's a particular place that goes hungry, then we've got to make sure that they can get supported. If there's a particular community of farmers who are hit by insects or a pathogen, we've got to make sure we can support them too. So we must build in the necessary support for resilience, the necessary protection mechanisms. But surely one of the things we're learning is that there is value in more resilient, shorter supply chains that respond to the interests of the smallholder. Thank you.
David, I can think of no better person that lives this value-driven mindset, and we appreciate your time, your wise words as always, and we look forward to you to working very, very closely with you in the future to build back better and to figure out how we make food systems that work for every single person on this planet. So thank you very much. It's been
Thank you very much, Brent. Thanks, everybody. I will turn off my video, and after a bit, I'll slip off. But what a joy, and how great that you're all working on this. It's a time like no other, a time of huge suffering and huge sadness and anger. But it's also a time of opportunity. And I think that is a responsibility for all of us. Bye.
Thank you. All right, moving on to the next couple of speakers. It's exciting that there's a lot of data which is coming out now, not only about the COVID-19 and about vaccines, but also how as we look at food environments, how food environments are changing. The first speaker, Steneke Onema, will share some results from a survey that they've done that looks specifically at how the food systems are changing and as people are adjusting and changing their food environments with the current crisis. So I'll hand it over to you, Steneke. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you very much. And also thank you to David. Always good to listen to your energizing keynote addresses. And today you highlighted very well the links between several systems, the food system, the health systems, environment, and social protection. Now we are going to focus a little bit more on the food environment, the interface of people and their food system. Next, please. So what we've seen over the past few months is the large parts of the world are in semi-confinement and the world economy is moving in slow motion. We see that the disease COVID-19 and the measures that are taken to reduce its spread, they are causing disruptions in the day-to-day supply at all levels, as was highlighted by David as well. So really it's a spillover effect from the health system to the food systems. And related to nutrition, we see predictions of increases of at least 150,000 additional child deaths. We see that COVID-related restrictions risk pushing many into acute hunger. And we also see that there is an increased risk for overweight and obesity and diet-related NCDs, non-communicable diseases. As from the other side, we know that people with obesity and NCDs are also more vulnerable to becoming severely ill and to die from COVID-19. So there's really this interface between food, nutrition, and health. So a few more words next, please, on the food environment. Every day, people buy, consume their food through their food environment. It's really the interface between people's diet and the wider food system. There's not yet full let's say, understanding about the food environment. For example, the high-level panel of experts defines it as a physical, economic, political, and social cultural context in which people consume their food and engage with the food systems. But the FAO, a little bit earlier on, defined food environment more as the food itself. All the foods which are available and accessible to people in the settings which they go about in their daily lives, in supermarkets, small retails, wet markets, street food stalls, etc., all the places where people procure and eat their food. Next, please. Then recently, Turner et al., they proposed a new conceptual framework for food environments that more clearly defines the external and personal food environments that are influencing the attitudes and habits of people. So the external domain is defined, consists of food availability, prices, vendors, product properties, marketing, and regulation design of the food environment, whereas the personal domain relates much more to geographical accessibility, affordability, convenience, and desirability. And what we see is that COVID-19 really has the potential impact on all these elements of the food environment. And to me, this shows that the food environment is very sensitive to shocks elsewhere in the system. So this is a picture, next one, that shows how all these elements are linked together in the food environment. So in COVID-19, for example, we see that food availability is seen in shops, for example, shortages of staples because of stockpiling. So some people buy a lot and other people don't have access anymore. Or in the personal domain, you see affordability changes because people are losing their jobs and therefore have less money to spend on the food they normally prefer to eat. So there's definitely this impact on the food environment. Next, please. So to get little bit more understanding, we did this survey in April on the impact of COVID-19 on the personal food environments. So we got over 2,000 responses from all over the world, 118 countries. But I have to admit, it was a bit of convenience sampling, and that's shown in the graphs below. Almost half came from Western Europe, of the respondents came from Western Europe and the US. Most of them are women, etc. But let me show a few of these changes. So what we see is that food was a third disrupted activity after social and work-related activities. Then again, if we focus a little bit on that food-related activities, you see an increase in food stockpiling, which is likely linked that nearly half report buying more food out of anxiety. Next, please, and then immediately next. I'm going too fast. Next, yes, and then next again. Yeah, what we also see is that home cooking and food stockpiling seems to be accompanied by increased awareness of food waste and the promising indication that food is not being wasted more than normally. But I need to admit this may have to do also with our bias in the sample. Then home cooking seems to be the big winner. That's focusing on home cooking. And now quickly to the key takeaway messages, because I understand my time is up. It's the time now to really support and enact changes in the food environment that guide people towards making more sustainable and healthy food choices. You can move on to the next slide. Next slide. Yeah. Then the second key message is that there is now an open window for strengthening local food systems with shorter supply chains, nutrition at their core, and greater food diversity to enhance resilience and deliver healthy food for all, leaving no one behind. So the shorter supply chains was also something mentioned by David Nabarro. But we can also take action at a personal level. We can focus on local foods, purchase from local suppliers and growers. And support your locals. It's a very known slogan these days. Get adventurous in the kitchen with food produced in your areas. Focus on nutrition and set healthy aims in your cooking. And then finally, avoid food waste by making the most of what you have. Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much. If you move to the next slide, you could see the place where you can find more information about what UNSCN has collected among the members related to nutrition and COVID. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Seneke. And to everybody out there, if you have questions, please put them over in the chat box. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions for you. I think it's interesting that home cooking was one of the big winners, and that as we deal with all the tragic consequences and fallout from this, there are some areas where we can actually move forward to build that better. Local cooking, home cooking. It's very interesting. Moving on to the next presenter, Yuna Shifolo, the co-leader of the French National Experts Network on Local Food, will share some results from a recent survey that they did in France. Over to you.
Thank you, Brent. Good afternoon to everyone. So next, please. So I will present the result of a large survey that we conduct in France. From the beginning of the confinement, it started in France at mid-March. And we launched, next please, large survey online. It has been launched by a collective of researchers, agricultural development practitioners, and civil society association. So our questionnaire was dedicated to collect qualitative and, if possible, quantitative data about the impact of the crisis on food systems, not only on local food ones, also on agro-industrial proximity or the diverse food systems that coexist in France. And we received more than 600 contributions until the 11th of May. So it's the first day of the progressive reopening of a place to eat or to consume for restaurants and so on, of school in France. We received, so this answer come mostly from consumers, but consumers not only describing what happens for them in their houses, but also as good observer about what happens in their food environment. And some people play the role as a reporter, field reporter, to explain, to describe with very concrete data what happened when they buy food in supermarkets or to a producer. So we covered more than 2,000 situations from all regions of France. Next, please. And so you can find the map with the respondent, so localization of the respondent. And we cross this answer with input from newspaper, from interviews with other experts. So next, please. In matter of results, the main result is we observed a high demand for local food and direct food supply chain. So until 10th higher than usually, especially for a producer of fresh vegetables or fruit near cities, near big cities, but also quite more little cities. So 3 main reasons for reassurance. So for people, it's more safe to buy directly to producers because the product has not been touched by many hands, has not traveled. And we could see this process also during the MATCO crisis. So 20 years ago, we have the same process. A second reason is that French consumers want to support farmers, French farmers, but also and mostly local farmers in their territory. And the third reason is to get fresh products, just to be sure to preserve a healthy diet in this period. So because of the close, many markets have been closed. So open air market have been closed. So food catering also. So there have been many adaptations, many innovations carried by citizens, carried by farmers themselves. So many grassroots initiatives to procure local food. especially a lot of informal neighborhood purchasing groups in neighborhood, in cities, in the same apartment. People were mutualizing and order directly to a producer. We observe many online platforms with the use of digital technologies, so farmer drives, but also social entrepreneurs developing digital tools that produce an extension of local food consumption to regular consumers not engaged before in local food consumption, in sustainable food consumption. So public programs in parallel have been developed, often uncoordinated, and have been mostly counterproductive because we had many maps, but it takes much time to producer to announce which products they have to sell. It was so not so efficient. They also made not efficient management of open air market because they have been closed and after they have been reopened, but partially reopened. But it's with exclusion, of the poorest people. So not a good management of that, even in territories where there are some local food policies. That means that the governance that could have been implemented before was not so efficient in this time of crisis. We also observe a food fracture. That means that despite solidarity actions, so many all vulnerable people had difficulty to find food, and so food assistance, food aid, food banks have been over-solicited in this period. Next, please. So from this results, so we can address several recommendations, both for research and policy. First of all, so it's important to reduce vulnerabilities while improving the complementarities between different food systems, because we can see in this period that local food systems have been an asset in this period, of course, in complementarity with long chain. But what we observe is that we do not know precisely the food flows. We lack of data because these data are controlled by private companies, not by the state, and we are very dependent about on them because they control the data and the flows. So we have to reappropriate the knowledge about food flows to anticipate possible shocks. And these flows are not only physical flows, it's also socio-economic relations. So provoking some vulnerabilities, but also some strongness. So we have to better know this. We have to balance the institutional support towards local food system, because in this period, local food system act as a public service, but are not a knowledge for that. So, and it's difficult for farmers to find land, for instance. Land is dedicated to large farms and not to small ones. And we have to favor a fair dialogue between the food system, just to combine not only resilience, that means quantity or resistance to shock, but resilience and transition. We have also to think collectively about how to support all these grassroots initiatives, not only at local level, but also by the state and European policies, and also how to, so as with researchers, but also with a lot of people, so developers and so on, we think about a right to sustainable food and about an experimentation of a state and local authorities sponsored social insurance for food, like in the healthcare system. Next, please. Just to go further, so the link to the, so you can find many resources in this, so it's a link to the survey. The survey has been translated in different languages and has been diffused in different countries. So we will meet in next November, to exchange about the impact. But in this you will find so a large amount of results in France, and it's coming for the comparison between different countries. Thank you.
Thank you. It's extremely exciting, and some of these recurring messages of local food and making sure that the vulnerable are not the most impacted. And I think it's interesting, this right to sustainable food, I think, is something that we should definitely explore and think about more. We've got the questions coming in, and to everybody out there, please, if you have questions, make sure that you address them to all participants so that we can read them. Moving on to some practical examples, we have two exciting speakers coming up. The Vice Minister, Ms. Ana Cristina Quiros Soto, Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock from Costa Rica, will share some practical experiences directly from her country. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, everybody. My presentation is in Spanish. Thank you. Bueno, muy buenos días a todos y a todas. Es un honor para nosotros estar en este foro tan interesante. Un poquito contar lo que estamos haciendo en Costa Rica de cara al COVID desde el sector agroalimentario costarricense. Bueno, yo creo que el Mr. Nabarro explicó muy bien que la crisis ha afectado muchísimo el turismo en nuestro país, y esto ha hecho definitivamente que tengamos una afectación directa en nuestro sector productivo agroalimentario. En ese sentido, el cierre de las fronteras, principalmente de algunos socios comerciales en su momento, ha hecho que nuestro sector exportador, agroexportador, tenga una afectación directa. El cierre de las actividades turísticas en nuestro país también ha afectado directamente a nuestro sector productivo costarricense. Y el cierre también en su momento de actividades comerciales, como lo fueron restaurantes, centros comerciales. Sin embargo, nuestro sector productivo ha sido un sector resiliente a la crisis. Desde el Ministerio de Agricultura y Ganadería en Costa Rica hemos desarrollado una serie de acciones directamente con el sector productivo. Mantenemos un diálogo constante. Tenemos unas mesas de trabajo con los diferentes sectores, unas mesas de articulación con los diferentes sectores, y tenemos el liderazgo de una mesa de seguridad alimentaria que mantiene esa comunicación directa con los diferentes sectores para poder captar la información día a día de la afectación que van teniendo nuestros productores. A pesar de ello, tenemos un tipo de sector productivo que no se ha visto directamente afectado, porque las personas, aunque se quedan en casa debido a la crisis, consumen productos agroalimentarios desde sus hogares. Y esto lo estamos viendo como una oportunidad de educar al consumidor costarricense, el consumidor nacional, de la importancia. Siguiente, por favor. En cuanto a las acciones propiamente del Ministerio, hemos hecho para agilizar lo que son nuestros sistemas agroalimentarios y el apoyo al sector productivo, hemos tomado una serie de medidas directamente para beneficio de nuestro sector, que tiene que ver con la simplificación de trámites, la agilización de los servicios que prestamos de manera digital, la capacitación, la innovación, la comunicación adecuada con los diferentes sectores para poder generar resiliencia en ellos mismos. Siguiente, por favor. Creo que es la siguiente. Listo, gracias. Desde el SENACE, el Servicio Fitosanitario del Estado, prestamos diferentes servicios directamente al sector pecuario y al sector agrícola. Como ya lo mencioné, hemos tenido un tema de simplificación de trámites, de agilización de servicios, garantizando la inocuidad y garantizando las medidas sanitarias que nos implica todo lo que es la atención del COVID en nuestro país. Yo quisiera aclarar que el tema de la atención del COVID está dirigido de la siguiente manera, poniendo primero la salud, de segundo la seguridad y de tercero la economía. Sin embargo, aunado a estos tres ejes de acción, nosotros desde el Ministerio tratamos de mantener nuestros servicios, tratamos de mantener lo que es la comercialización, el mercado, hemos ajustado la condición del mercado en el caso de las ferias del agricultor, que son mercados locales, así como las subastas agrícolas, hemos tratado de ajustarlas a los mecanismos de salud y de sanidad que requiere la atención del COVID. Pasamos a la siguiente. Desde el Instituto de Desarrollo Rural, que es un instituto que promueve y fomenta la producción a nivel territorial, se han agilizado los servicios que tienen que ver con tenencia de tierra, que tienen que ver con crédito rural, se han flexibilizado estos créditos, se han brindado moratorias. Hemos hecho una serie de acciones que permitan a los usuarios del Instituto de Desarrollo Rural tener los servicios de manera más ágil y más pronta. Y de igual manera, en el programa de abastecimiento agropecuario, el PIMA, se han ajustado, que es nuestro mercado de comercialización mayorista, se han ajustado los servicios y la atención de cara a lo que nos exige el Ministerio de Salud en cuanto a condiciones de sanidad, utilización de mascarillas, guantes, distanciamiento social. Todo esto nosotros lo aplicamos en nuestros mercados locales. En cuanto a nuestro Consejo Nacional de Producción, es decir, que todas estas instituciones que menciono forman parte de esta mesa de seguridad alimentaria donde se toman las decisiones de alto nivel para lo que es el sector agropecuario y pesquero en nuestro país. El Consejo Nacional de Producción se ha abocado a la producción de alcohol antiséptico para todo el uso interno en las instituciones, el Ministerio de Salud, los hospitales y demás. Y también tenemos en este programa el sistema de abastecimiento de los comedores escolares, que si bien es cierto las escuelas están cerradas, continuamos brindando una alimentación saludable a los niños y a las niñas que hoy por hoy no están yendo a clases, pero que muchos dependen de este apoyo para poder tener una alimentación adecuada y nutritiva. Entonces, esos servicios se han mantenido a pesar de la crisis, a pesar de que los estudiantes no están asistiendo a clases en este momento. En cuanto al Incopesca, que es el instituto que atiende nuestro sector pesquero, además de tener moratorias en lo que son las licencias de pesca, hemos tenido también un acompañamiento, una producción una promoción del consumo del producto pesquero, que para nosotros es importantísimo y se ha permitido encadenar al sector pesquero nacional con diferentes mercados locales que antes no existían. Entonces nuestro sector ha venido innovando y ha venido creando sistemas de encadenamiento entre unos y otros. Nosotros en Costa Rica apostamos por la solidaridad entre sectores y esto ha permitido un desarrollo adecuado de cada uno de los sectores que nosotros acompañamos y representamos. A ver, la siguiente. Gracias. El Infocop es el Instituto Nacional de Fomento Cooperativo. Las cooperativas juegan un papel fundamental en el desarrollo económico a nivel territorial y en cuanto a este desarrollo, hemos a través del Infocop buscado lo que es la moratoria en créditos que hoy por hoy tienen las cooperativas, ajustes de los plazos, de las tasas de interés, se han ampliado los estudios técnicos, la capacitación, créditos rápidos de salvamento, el acompañamiento a nivel regional y sectorial. Muy importante, el Infocop da ese acompañamiento para que las cooperativas en Costa Rica puedan tener resiliencia, puedan empoderarse de las acciones propias que tienen que tomar cada una de cara a esta emergencia nacional que tenemos. Y bueno, han jugado un papel fundamental en el desarrollo y en el impulso y en la adaptación de estas cooperativas a la situación que hoy estamos teniendo en Costa Rica. Tenemos un sistema de banca para el desarrollo en Costa Rica que nos permite también dar créditos accesibles al sector productivo y como lo mencioné anteriormente, todas las medidas en este momento en nuestro país van en función de agilizar trámites, de poner a disposición créditos blandos, de hacer ajustes de deudas, de hacer moratorias, de flexibilizar, de disminuir tasas de interés y no es diferente en el sistema de banca para el desarrollo. Además de eso, venimos con un proceso fuerte al consumidor nacional para que consuma producto nacional, principalmente lo que hablaban anteriormente las personas que me precedieron en el tema de consumo local, mercados locales. También tenemos unas acciones puntuales que es en cuanto a las empresas, la reducción del 50% de la jornada laboral, así como disminución en insumos importantes para la producción, como es en este caso la electricidad. Estas acciones van de cara a poder reactivar al sector productivo y poder darle las condiciones necesarias para que sea sostenible o se sostenga durante la crisis y después entrar en la etapa de reactivación. Como ustedes lo saben, Costa Rica todavía está en una etapa donde la curva ha venido últimamente en crecimiento y nosotros estamos, podríamos decir que en medio de la pandemia todavía. Entonces, estamos sosteniendo los sectores para poder entrar a una reactivación ganando, por decirlo de alguna manera. Siguiente. Bueno, como principales retos cuando hablamos de seguir produciendo, seguimos fomentando la producción, lo que es la dotación o la donación de semillas a nuestros productores. En este caso se vuelve muy importante la agricultura familiar en nuestro país. La dotación de semilla, como ya lo mencioné, créditos blandos. Estamos con una etapa de agricultura de precisión, el fomento de la agricultura de precisión para utilizar menos insumos en la producción y ser más efectivos, más rápidos, con mayor productividad y mejores utilidades. Entonces tenemos un programa nacional de agricultura de precisión que estamos lanzando de cara a esta crisis como parte de nuestra reactivación productiva a nivel territorial. En cuanto a innovación en la comercialización, hemos desarrollado un sistema, una plataforma que le llamamos la finca agropecuaria. La finca agropecuaria es comercio de proximidad donde tenemos al productor. Como ya lo mencioné, la crisis ha hecho que tengamos un volumen de producción a nivel territorial que se nos ha quedado y la ponemos a disposición de manera directa a la agroindustria, haciendo un enlace y un encadenamiento entre la producción, el productor, directamente con la agroindustria, también para evitar el desperdicio de alimentos. Estamos también fomentando los mercados inteligentes, los mercados virtuales, la comercialización minorista de manera virtual y fomentando, siguiente por favor, y fomentando en el productor y en el consumidor esa conciencia social, esa conciencia de que debemos hacer las cosas de mejor manera. Con el Ministerio de Agricultura, con el apoyo de la FAO y de la OPS, estamos teniendo campañas de comunicación en redes sociales, dando énfasis a la importancia de la alimentación saludable, el consumo, la comercialización y muy importante, independientemente de la crisis, continuamos con una agenda agroambiental, con una producción basada en la descarbonización, fomentando una producción económica, social y ambientalmente sostenible. No queremos dejar eso de lado, a pesar de la crisis, estamos fomentando e incentivando a nuestros productores a que sigamos produciendo con conciencia y al consumidor a que continúe consumiendo de manera consciente, de manera nutritiva y de manera que todos podamos ayudarnos a enfrentar esta crisis apoyándonos económicamente entre los sectores. Eso sería. Muchísimas gracias de mi parte. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Vice Minister, thank you very much. I mean, it's such an extremely comprehensive and well-coordinated plan, it seems. And just think if we could do that for the global food system, we could move mountains. So I really appreciate all the work that you have done and being able to share some of that with us. Moving on to our next practical case. If you could do the next slide, please. Portia Price, yeah, there we go. Counselor from CONSIA, RAS, the Council of Food Security and Sustainable Nutrition of Rio Grande, Brazil. We've heard a lot about Brazil lately, and I hope you guys are doing okay down there. Over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all for the opportunity. I would like to greet all participants, Madam Vice Minister Queiroz, fellow colleague speakers, and thank you for the opportunity to share the experience of Conceptual. Next slide, please. So since the pandemic has started in Brazil, I think before we talk a little bit of our actions, we should give a little bit of context about what is CONSEA. So CONSEA stands for Council of Food Security and Sustainable Nutrition of Rio Grande do Sul state. We are the further south state of Brazil with about 12 million population and almost 500 municipalities. CONSEA works since 2003 as an advisory council to the executive government, so we make a bridge between civil society and the government. CONSEA is composed mostly by civil society organizations, it's 2/3. The presidency is always from somebody in the civil society, and 1/3 of the composition of the council is by representatives of state government institutions. Next, please. So since the pandemic has started, CONSEA is trying to work as best as possible to face the COVID-19. We have first launched a document with recommendations for the government trying to prevent that the health crisis we have transform itself in a food crisis. We also, in March 26, was about 2 weeks after the pandemic arrived in Brazil, we, following the recommendations of the National Forum of Food Security, we started what we call the Gaucho Emergency Committee to Fight Hunger, which means that besides the organization already a part of CONSEA, we have opened a wider range of organizations. We have included more farmers organizations, some legal justice organizations to help us to be more effective. We are also making our meetings with the municipal food councils in the state, and we are working in especially 3 lines of action. Next, please. The first line of action addresses the need to provide proper food for vulnerable populations. So we have a kind of channel for people to address and to relate insecurity food situations. So it's a WhatsApp phone number. We have worked together with civil society organizations to deliver food for vulnerable populations. We have a lot of solidarity campaigns. So CONSEA is working to disclose different campaigns from many organizations, both to raise funds and to raise money. So for give you an example, just the Landless Workers Movement, MST, have donated over 100 tons of organic food for vulnerable people to be distributed in the state. And we are also working to deliver those food baskets to those who need. We have been engaged in the delivery of 3,000 food baskets. You can see some of the pictures in the site. And this is all very important and relevant, but unfortunately, this is not enough. So we also understand that our estimative is that we have in the state at least 2.5 million people in vulnerable situations that needed food. So we are working with the state, trying to pressure the state to make emergency food purchase to distribute for those people and giving priority to purchase those food from family farmers. We have a program that addresses that it's called PA. So we are really working with the state to try to implement this program. Next, please. The second line of action addresses the school children meals. So we have a program that's called PENAI that delivers food for children in the school. Sometimes this might be the main or the only proper meal the children have. Because of the pandemic, we are with all schools closed, so they required a change in the law and adaptation of this program to be able that besides the children have the meal at the school, the schools can buy the food and deliver it to the family so they can cook at home so the children can still have the meals. This program, since 2009, incentivizes family farming purchase and agroecological production. So we are monitoring how this program is unfolding here in the state during the pandemic. Unfortunately, we have very bad reaction from the government in the state. The first purchase of food for schools was made in a single supermarket with 22 million reais invested, in a very inadequate composition of food basket with excess of sugar, with ultra-processed products. This set up a reaction in the civil society. So we had many nutrition organizations complaining and setting public notes of concern of the low nutritional quality of the food. And we also have some farmers, families, organizations like Unicaps, COSEARGS, and FETRAP, federal organizations, setting up a legal process with the state to investigate these incidents, because there is also a non-compliance with the law that prioritizes family farmers. And next slide, please. The third line of action is trying to, for those who have money enough to buy food, incentivize that those people, next slide please, incentivize that general population have a qualified food, no, the previous one, sorry, have a qualified food during the pandemic. The previous slide. The previous slide, please. Okay, thank you. So it's to foster qualified food for general population. So we are trying to advertise how people can get better food. We are incentivizing family farmers markets. So those give a higher income for family farmers, and they provide healthier and more accessible food for consumers. We are working in liaison with the government to maintain all markets open with safe measures. We have, for instance, a case here in Porto Alegre, which is the capital, where in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a decree preventing family farmers to sell products in Porto Alegre. This was a big problem because Porto Alegre doesn't have enough food production to supply the population, and because family farmers from many regions in the state depend on the income they receive selling food in the capital. So we were able to reverse that. And we are also trying to incentivize people as much as possible by healthier food. So we have worked in collaboration with IDEC, which is the Brazilian Consumer Defense Institute, to set up a platform so people can get information about where to buy real food during the pandemic. We keep in a constant dialogue with family farmer organizations to give support to keep their markets and their production with all the safe measures they need. Next slide, please. And to close this presentation, I would like to talk a little bit of the main challenge we're facing. The first one, as you may know, we have a very intense spreading of COVID in Brazil. We are probably the new epicenter of COVID, unfortunately. We have a very high context of social precariousness of the population, so a strong inequality process that was already happening before the pandemic, and it's getting every day worse. Very high rates of unemployment, very high rates of hunger. We have a very strong disarticulation of the public policies on food and nutrition in the recent years. And I must comment that the first action of our current president was to extinguish the National Conselho. So it was like killing the head of the food security systems, a very, very damaging action. And we also have a very slow and insufficient action by the state government. So in some cases, it is contrary to the international recommendations, either to combat COVID or to guarantee food security. And at last, not least, Conceptual has a very improvised structure. We don't have like a headquarters or logistic equipment. So this all depends on the voluntary work of the counselors, which give us a very limited range for our actions. We really hope we could do more that we are be able to do. Thank you very much for the attention and your time. I'm available for questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Potira. That's, you know, despite all the odds that you're facing, it's extremely humbling to see the work that you guys are doing to focus on the vulnerable populations and make sure that everybody has access to healthy foods. Moving on to the next part of this webinar, we're going to get comments from 3 experts that focus on the main questions that each one of you received. The first one is the positive innovations changes that you would like to see highlighted among the response measures to this current crisis. And the second one is what are some of the policy measures that will be essential to ensure that we can turn this current crisis into an opportunity to truly build back better. So next slide, please. The first comment will be from Martina Otto, the head of the cities unit at UNEP, and I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Let's see whether the video now works. It didn't in the test, but maybe it will. If not, please bear with me without a picture. In a crisis, the cracks appear, and through the cracks appears the light. This is a quote from Massimo Bottura, the 3-star chef and founder of Food for Soul, someone who worked with very closely. And for those who are not as familiar with it, Food for Soul is an effort through which vulnerable people are served nutritious meals cooked with ingredients that would otherwise be thrown away. The COVID-19 crisis showed the cracks in our food systems, but they have been there for a long time. In seeing the light, I want to highlight 3 key lessons that need to guide our actions going forward. And the first is nature matters. There's a growing recognition that planetary health and people's health are strongly connected, as we have seen that land use change, not least due to unsustainable food systems, increases the risk of new diseases. The second is that there is a recognition that solidarity, inclusion, and cooperation is key in addressing big issues. Change can happen very quickly if forces align around a common sense of purpose. And the third is better interlinkages between different key themes. The time has come to better connect nature, climate, and land use in our responses. So now, how do we build forward better with this in mind? So, and no doubt that food systems, given their pivotal role in the nexus of people's and planet's health, as well as the sheer number of jobs that the sector provides across the value chain, will be central in the economic support packages driving the needed transformation. I want to highlight 3 elements here as well. And we already heard that complex supply chains have been more frequently disrupted, whereas local supply chains resisted. We've seen as well closure of local markets due to physical distancing. So that actually speaks against the local supply chains. There has been an unprecedented surge and interest in food and vegetable boxes from short supply chains, a lot of community level action, again, giving hope. Local governments are an additional actor that we haven't given enough focus to. Despite actions to improve their food systems and to develop food policies within the boundaries of their devolved powers and competencies, food is not yet part of mainstream urban and territorial planning. So I want to throw that into the discussion. There's numerous examples of actions, but most local governments are not sufficiently equipped for the challenge. So to build forward, we need to give a boost to urban peri-urban farming with a city-region approach, strengthening connections between farmers and consumers, and empower urban communities to grow some of their own food. We heard all this emphasis on schools and children, and I think this is super interesting. It has worked very well from a food access perspective, but there is something about education to sustainable food that comes with that as well. So I think this is a lesson learned that we can take much broader to other countries as well. The next one is circularity and behavior changes. And Stinika already mentioned the new trends of home cooking. Chefs have put on YouTube shows to show how to cook with what is in the fridge, what is left over, and to produce no waste, to use all the parts of the raws. And that's something that we really need to capitalize on to drive these behavioral changes. But also the circularity needs to get more focus, reducing waste as far as possible by increasing the use of cosmetically imperfect produce, of food byproducts, transforming them into new foods, compost or energy, and in the end serving a bioeconomy, which also helps build resilient and sustainable food systems. And here a key step is to measure and report on food loss and waste, because this enables countries and companies to understand the scale of the problem, its cost to the economy and to households, and to identify the hotspots to tackle the issues and the impact of policy interventions. Building back better will need to include the above to eliminate unnecessary costs, as a post-COVID economy will less than ever be able to afford to waste a third of food production. My third point is, and the last, is nature. We need to promote sustainable and regenerative agricultural practices with more efficient use of natural resources and food and crop diversification. And I really want to highlight this point because it very nicely links also with a possible diet diversification. To close, we need more coordinated action amongst different actors to build a strong policy coherence within food systems interventions to combat silo approach. And this is promoted through the collaborative framework for the sustainable food systems, which was developed under the OPN, the One Planet Network. And this provides guidance for the process and considerations to be taken into account to drive this needed transformation of our systems. And interestingly, the points that I've highlighted in my talk have come back throughout, and but for different reasons. And this gives really hope that we can work together all in the same direction for the multiple benefits. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. Absolutely, we can and must work together, and nature matters should be at the forefront of our thoughts as we build back better. So thank you for those wise words. Moving on to hearing from our second expert, Fatima Hachem, the Senior Nutrition Officer at FAO. We'll give her reflections and comments on the two questions. Over to you, Fatima.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and good morning to all of you. In fact, for the first question on the positive changes that we are seeing now, I'd like to highlight 2 points. First, the COVID-19 pandemic has repositioned the nutrition and diets as central to increasing resilience to pandemics. It has been said before, Stanike said it, David said it, that people with preconditions related to poor diets, in fact, like obesity, like cardiac diseases, like diabetes and cancer, have increased risk for severe infection and mortality. So if we come to this infection with a strong body that has been well nourished, then our chances of fighting the disease are higher. So this is one thing that I want to highlight. But also, David said it very well that we need to be COVID prepared. That is going to stay with us. This virus is not going to go, and the pandemic might come again. So we need to maintain healthy diets during, before, during, and after this crisis we are in. Because we need to increase resilience of individuals and resilience of communities, especially vulnerable communities. And we have seen the inequities in the profile of those who are being hit most by COVID-19. So being prepared is a very important change that we need to keep in mind, and nutrition is central for that. The second point that I want to make is that diets are the among or perhaps the first risk factor for the global burden of disease. So if we look at the dietary components and what they how they contribute to the global diet of disease, we see that among the highest factors are the fact that people eat low whole grains, they eat low, consume less fruits and vegetables than the recommended quantity. They don't eat enough nuts, for example, and seeds. So we know that these are contributors to the increase in the global burden of disease. So at the same time, diets that are rich in these dietary components are in many cases and for many countries the same food components that have low environmental and environmental impact and pressure. It's not the case in each and every country, but for the majority of countries it is. So FAO and WHO developed guiding principles on how to have a sustainable healthy diet. 16 guiding principles that touch on the health and nutrition, the environmental impacts, the economic aspects, and the cultural aspects. So I want to move on to what policy measures can be highlighted here. We need to ensure that markets are functioning and are stable at times of crisis so that they can make available and affordable, sustainable, healthy food options to vulnerable populations. We need to work on reducing the inequity in access to sustainable and healthy diets to shield the vulnerable populations, especially the people on low income and who have been hit hardly during the pandemic, the children, school children, the elderly. It was said that cooking has become like one of the coping or response strategies, but in order to do that, we need to promote not only food knowledge, but also to work with populations on competencies and skills to make the right food choices. We need to invest in short, diversified supply chain and not monotonous supply chain. But we also need to recognize and to support the agrobiodiversity as a contributor to the sustainable healthy diets. And through all these together, working on multi approaches and with multi-sectoral entities and partners, we can reach sustainable healthy diets that can lead and contribute to sustainable food systems. Thank you.
Fatima, thank you very much for those words and that message about healthy diets. You know, I would like to see that message of healthy diets play out much more as a front and center message within the media. So thank you for lifting it. Our last expert speaker will give her views, Margarita Ostrolaga, on the two questions. And Margarita from IFAD, I will hand it over to you now. Thank you. Margarita, are you there? Margarita, are you there? Looks like we may have lost Margarita, unfortunately. Well, let's just move on to the cooking question. So if we can move on to slide 58 and 59, please. So what did participants say? We don't have time to go through what each one of you said with this, but we will be emailing some of these responses to you so that you can see what some of the most common comments were. And I think many of the comments that you see here were echoed with the various speakers that we had today in terms of what are some of these positive innovations that we need to be looking at. Shorter supply chains, really looking towards the like the local level, having to like diversify food and what we're doing. You know, and I think one of the comments here, which is very interesting, is that if we can put such ambitious response measures into this COVID crisis, just think what we could do if we put the same response measures into limiting unhealthy, unsustainable food for every single person on this planet. So moving on to the wrap up. We wanted to thank everybody here for your time with this webinar. We have a number of others that we will be sending out some more information about. This is the first of many. to discuss this extremely important topic of the food systems and COVID-19. Not only the key drivers that actually gave rise to it, but also as we start to implement solutions, what are those solutions? And front and center in this is we need a food systems approach. We need to coordinate, we need to work together. We have to start working out of our silos, and we have been talking about that for years, and now we need to really start implementing that, especially to make sure that the vulnerable are not the most impacted by this. We need to look at livelihoods. We need to make sure that the livelihoods of individuals are not going to be impacted, that we're working with small farmers and businesses, and we have to address the global inequality crisis. Diets and nutrition matter, absolutely critical to this. Ensuring healthy diets to each person on the planet will help individuals to fight back diseases such as this, and that we need to work with all sectors and all segments to be able to ensure diets and nutrition for all people. And also nature matters. What we do to nature often comes back to hurt us and harm us. And I think we're seeing that now with this current crisis, is that as we start to impact nature, as we start to encroach in nature, that it could often has unintended consequences like we're seeing right now today. And we have to do everything that we can to protect it. So with that, I will wrap this up, and I will give my humblest thanks to each one of you for your time. Our time is very, very precious, and to give us 90 minutes of it is a humbling honor to each of you, and a big thanks to each of you. And we look forward to working with all of you in the future and to making healthy and sustainable food systems for every single person on this planet. With that, I will wrap up this first webinar and say thank you and stay healthy to all. Bye-bye.